Do you ever ask for advice and then get like the stupidest answer, but then you can't stop thinking about it, and then you're like, okay, I'm just gonna go with it? So these are my rankings. Hi guys, I wanted to talk just a little bit about all the books that I read in 2024, 23 books. I have been reading for some time with the writer or the artist lens. Like, that's just how I read books now, and I can't help it. I like to come away from every book that I read with a little bit of a tidbit, and that's what I'm going to be sharing with you today. Like, who I would recommend this book to, a takeaway, a major takeaway that I got, or an artist takeaway that I got from each book. And then I thought I would rank them, because why not? And then this is my silly ranking system that I kind of thought of. I was asking my husband what's an interesting rating system that I could have for my books that would make it worth you watching my videos about my books. And he kept on saying like these like S-tier ranking systems, and I was like, no, not like that. Just joking around, we got to saying try it, bite it, lick it, spit it, and get all up in it as my rankings. And I thought I'm just gonna go with that, like, because why not? Yeah, so obviously Get Up All in It is gonna be my most recommended. Try It will be my least, and then I guess Bite It, then Lick It, then Spit It. Spit It will be, those ranks. The first book I read in 2024 was Cartooning, Philosophy and Practice by Ivan Brunetti. This is actually a class in a book about cartooning. Anyone who wants to feel more confident in their drawing, especially cartooning. And the reason for that is it's a class in a book and it's fun to do. The artist takeaway that I got is that your brevity in your art is really important. How little can you draw or say to convey your point? Any kind of visual art, in dance, in music, in writing, and brevity can make things really punch a lot better. And that was my main artist takeaway that I got from it. I did it with my husband, so it was really fun to go through this class. I'm gonna put this in Spit It. Oh, I didn't even say. The reason why this is a little bit delayed, it's not at the end of 2024 or even the beginning of 2025 anymore. We're already like all the way done with 2025. That's how it feels like time is going sometimes. I spent some time, this was so much fun for me, drawing little book covers. How fun! Alright, so this I'm gonna put in Spit It. Alright, the next book that I read was No One Else. This was a graphic novel. I was thinking that I might be a graphic novelist, and I still think that, but you'll see that a lot of my books earlier in the year are more geared towards that. So I recommended it for anyone who recently pulled themselves out of depression. It's kind of a slice of life look into the lives of a small family after a tragedy happens, and then there's some grief, but then it's really more about like how you pull yourself out of depression, or how you deal with someone who won't pull themselves out of depression. My takeaway is everyone is at different points in their life when tragedy strikes, so everyone grieves differently and at a different pace. The ways that other people act around you is going to make a huge impact on that too. So if you've recently felt anything like that, I think just seeing someone else go through that, even if it's character, is helpful. My artist takeaway is plot is rarely king. I'm going to put this in Bite It, Sew It Yourself by Daisy Braid. This book is like a pattern book, and I obviously didn't put in every pattern book and every cookbook that I used this year on my list, but I did put in the books that I actually more or less read cover to cover. This one was more of like a philosophy. So I recommend this to self-drafters, new sewists, and the formula-minded, because the philosophy behind this is that you don't need to do actual patterns. You can measure your body and self-draft off of that. And on top of that, you can utilize as much of the fabric as possible instead of having a lot of waste every time you make something. So my takeaway here is waste is silly. Start with these waste-less projects. And as an artist, this is more of a full book glossary than a pattern book. The philosophy of making your own clothes is really strong. So I didn't actually end up making very many, if any at all, projects from this book, but I have some things written down and some ideas that I might make later on. So this, I'm also going to put it in Bite It. Now we're really going to get into the books that are how to draw guidebooks on comics, but these two books are the next books that I read. Understanding Comics and Making Comics really made an impact on me. Understanding Comics was the first one I read, and I recommend it to whoever wants to understand comics from a creator's point of view. And this book really changed how I feel about myself as a writer, as a creator, and it gave me a lot of confidence in my ability to write a graphic novel or a graphic nonfiction work. My takeaway is that comics are poignant and beautiful. My main artist takeaway is that the stories that are told in between the panels are my personal superpower. That's how I can really reach people. When I think about myself as a writer, when I think about myself as a published author, I'm like, oh, this will be so great if someone could get something out of my book. And when I think about that, I think about what goes on in the reader's head when they read. And that is something that is unwritten. When he talked about the writing that is in between the panels, that really got me. I always felt really connected to the idea of trusting my audience when I make art, and I think that really was good for me. So this is going to get all up in it. This was my favorite nonfiction of the year. Making Comics was also a good one. This was written several years later and was more about that, not just the philosophy behind comics, but actually how to do it. So I recommend this to anyone who read Understanding Comics. It's a really good follow-up book to it. My takeaway is it takes a special person to write graphic novels, and I might be one. The art tidbit that I got from it is just the idea of balancing intensity and clarity in every kind of art. So I really like that. Not quite get all up in it, but I'll put it in Spit It. Then I read The Everything Guide to Graphic Novels and How to Draw a Graphic Novel. I thought of these both more as reference books. I thought of this one more as a process guide and something that you can look into and kind of get to kind of dip your toe into it. I might recommend reading both of these books before you read the Understanding Comics and Making Comics. So the takeaway I got from this is I wouldn't mind being part of this culture of comic book making or graphic novel making, but I could also be okay with not being in it. And then from How to Draw a Graphic Novel, I recommend this to anyone who wants to learn from a lot of different sources, and it's more aspirational, I thought, this book. So because this book is aspirational, my takeaway was it's maybe not really for learning how to do it yourself, but hearing about how other people did it. My art takeaway, I don't have to force my art or my writing in any particular direction. I was really trying to write a graphic novel at the beginning of the year, and it wasn't really happening, and maybe it's something that happens later in life, or maybe it's just not the right time. Maybe I need to do just the classic fiction writing first and see where that goes, but I don't have to put myself in a box. We just can see what happens. So that's what I got from these. I did like reading them, but they, they weren't, like, changing my life like the other ones were. So I'm going to put these on Try It. Mooncakes and Milk Bread. So this is similar to Sew It Yourself. This is a cookbook. I'm not usually one to read a whole cookbook. I usually, like, look through it or look at the recipes that I want to do. But this one, I was planning a Lunar New Year party, and I really wanted to see kind of the whole idea behind this book. I really enjoyed reading this. It is an Asian bakery cookbook, so anyone who wants to kind of get more about that is who I recommend it to. Some things that I love, like some things that I love to eat from, different places, they're achievable at home. I made some of these for that Lunar New Year party, and I'm very proud of myself for it. I love the stories behind it. It felt not like, it felt memory, so I really liked reading this book. And my favorite things that I made were the almond cookies and the egg tarts. The egg tarts were, like, above and beyond my expectations. I never thought I could make egg tarts. Gotten them from a lot of Amish bakeries, and they're, like, so good, but, like, it was not that hard. I was able to make it. And then the almond cookies, like, that's the recipe I'm going to go back to a lot. It's gluten-free, so I'm definitely going to go back to it a lot. And so I'm going to put this in Lick It, because I think putting it in Spit It would be rude. You, the story. Now I'm getting back into some how-to books about writing, and this was a pretty quick read for me. I would recommend this book to any aspiring author or writer, and anyone who needs to remember or to think about why me? Why am I the person writing this? And it's always a good reminder to have that. The takeaway that I have is anecdotes and comedy are very powerful. You can use it as like a way to really not toy with somebody's emotions, but your readers can feel like when there's comedy. And I think that's something that I could potentially be good at. I'm not that great at, like, long-term running joke kind of things, but I think if I do put that into some of my books, that would be good. And my artist takeaway is it's emotional and okay if something takes a really long time, especially comedy, if it takes a long time to write. This one was pretty good. I'm going to put it in Lick It as well. Then I got this How to Write a Book and Get It Published. Like, I hardly even decorated it because the book itself was not really decorated. This book was all about self-publishing and how to self-publish, really. My takeaway is just an idea about how this particular guy got his book published, or his books published. My artist takeaway from this book was he talked a lot about the kind of writer he is not. He said, the best way is to self-publish, because if you want to publish the standard way by going through an agent and like finding a publisher and stuff, then you have to be like this kind of writer. And then he explained like the kind of writer that I am. So I felt a lot of confidence after that. Didn't like the book much. Had I not read this book, I would have never felt that. I'm going to put this and Try It. Then I got back to fiction. Nerdcrush. I recommend this to any cosplayers, maskers, and even catfish, people whose inner worlds are bigger than their outer worlds. So I definitely fall into that category. I think a lot of people fall into that category and don't realize that it is really special and as valid as a way to live as other people, because I think it's very much frowned upon. My artist takeaway is that miscommunication can be written well if anxiety is not forgotten. Sometimes you can get really frustrated when you're reading and you're like, why don't they just have a conversation? But this book really got into, why am I not having a conversation with this person? And so I think that's something good to remember. Lick It. Then I read Pippi Longstocking. I don't remember why. I recommend it to second graders because I think that's probably how old I was when I read it. My takeaway is that fantasy is so weird for children. And then it reminded me kind of James Trotter's parents just being killed by a rhinoceros on the first page of James and the Giant Peach, and that's so weird. Like, we just accepted it and like moved on. like just accepted that he lived in a peach after that. And like, what happened to Pippi Longstocking's parents for real? And then my artist takeaway from that, reading that, was that I can stand to be a little bit more irreverent, have a little bit more magic and fantasy in my regular day-to-day realistic fiction that I write. So it's always good. I had a lot of fun drawing this one. I'm gonna put this in Bite It, because it wasn't as interesting as I thought it was going to be. The no girlfriend rule. I recommend this to anyone who has shrunk themselves down in order to fit in. My overall takeaway is taking a beat to understand other people can really go a long way in understanding yourself. Lots of different characters in this book. I really recommend this book. My artist takeaway is to don't be afraid of writing the fiction within the fiction. I get scared to do that. I have actually a couple of finished manuscripts that don't just have big things missing because I didn't write the fiction within the fiction. Like writing books that are inside of books, writing plays that are inside of books. Like, that's a whole other endeavor that you have to go through, and that's not easy. I don't hear a lot of people talking about how you have to do that if you want that to be in your book. I love this book. This was so good. Something that was so needed to, especially the shrinking yourself down in order to fit in, shrinking yourself down in order to be accepted into some place where you don't necessarily want to be accepted. If you're your truest and fullest self. Such a good job of writing this book. And it is centered around a Dungeons and Dragons tabletop game, and I love that. And that's the fiction that's within the fiction. And then it's just all about finding your people. I'm putting this in Get All Up in It. Adrian Tomine, The Loneliness of the Long Distance Cartoonist. So he is a graphic novelist, and this is a graphic, autobiographical memoir kind of thing. So I would recommend this to graphic novels, especially his graphic novel lovers, and artists with various stages of success. I like how he talks about having success and not always feeling like success. My takeaway is that success does not kill insecurity. A big theme of this book is that he is, even with the success that he has, he never thinks that he is any good. And my artist takeaway is it is not ability, talent, or pride, but the undying desire to create that makes you an artist. I'm going to put this in Lick It. The Kamogawa Food Detectives. Hot book this year. It is translated from the Japanese. Definitely people who love nostalgia around food, which who isn't someone who loves nostalgia around food? That would be weird to me. My takeaway is that heart is more important than precision. If I see you, you see me. And so that is also with something that I'm thinking about my art. And my artist takeaway is to keep it simple. Every time I read something translated from Japanese, it's such a specific, really good art, because I don't know Japanese. I'm never gonna know what it's like to grow up knowing Japanese and then read a Japanese book, but I do know exactly what it's like to grow up knowing English and read a book translated from Japanese to English, and it's very special. I've always really liked any book that I read translated from Japanese. Oh, it's a food one. I'm still gonna put it in Spin It. Bite Me, Royce Taslim. I was reading this when my niece was around and she kept on calling it that vampire book. I thought that was very funny. So now every time I think about this book, I think that vampire book. It's not a vampire book. It's about comedy, really, stand-up. I recommend it to anyone who loves enemies to lovers and anyone who's really interested in some really good settings. This book is set in Malaysia and it's awesome. The takeaway that I got is classism comes from all different angles and all different aspects, and there's a lot of bad guys when it comes to classism, and like understanding each other is more important than anything else. Love the comedy. My artist takeaway is that the stand-up sets that were written in this are also like something that has to be written within the writing that you write, and it's not as scary anymore because I see a lot of people doing it and they're able to do it, and that means that I should be able to do it. And also, having different settings is not as scary. I have a couple books in mind that are going to be set in the Philippines or in Japan. Even though I haven't been there, I still am thinking about writing about those, so I might have to do a little bit of research, but I do have a little bit more confidence after reading this because most of the book has nothing to do with that. I feel like it wouldn't be right to not put this in Bite It, and that's probably where I would put it, somewhere between Bite It and Lick It. So I'm actually gonna move this one down. Then Adrian Tomine rears his ugly head again. And this one is called Shortcomings. This book was interesting. I recommend it. Oh, I even wrote it's hard to recommend this book because it has like some unsavoriness to it, but I might recommend it to Asians or people who want to understand different views of being Asian. My takeaway from this is it's honest and extremely cringy, but isn't that the point? I wouldn't have the cojones myself to be able to write a book like this, but my artist takeaway is, what cojones do I have to write about? Because I do have, like, I didn't have ever the thoughts that this person in this book had, but I do have thoughts, and like I think I can be brave enough to write about them. I think I'll put it in Bite It. The Wrong Kind of Weird. I recommend this to outsiders who crave a well-paced and witty story. My takeaway is you can frustrate your readers as long as your characters are awesome. You can have many characters as long as your characters are awesome. You can switch timelines as much as you want as long as your characters are awesome. The characters were awesome in this book. It was so good, so healthy. I loved every minute of it. I actually read this. It was one of my bathroom books, and my husband also read it. And so, like, we read it kind of at the same time. Sometimes I would get a little bit ahead, sometimes he would get a little bit ahead, and we really like talking about it with each other too. My artist takeaway is I also want to write for Chris as much as possible. So my husband reads different books than what I like to read, so that means that he reads different books than what I like to write, but I still want to write for him as much as possible, and I think he will really like my books. This is straight up to the top. She Gets the Girl. I loved this as a romantic story. My takeaway is predictable outcomes in your A plot are so okay, especially if your B plots are immaculate. There's a split perspective in this book. I don't really fancy myself a split perspective kind of writer, but I think it's possible. Like I said earlier, plot is not king. It's all the interstitials and everything that goes in between your plot. Like, those are the things that really are going to sell me as an author, sell my books. And my art takeaway is I can do this. People can enjoy all sorts of books. I really felt like this book was like predictable, but not in a way that was boring or annoying or offensive. I think the mom relationships in this book, especially for some people who for the first time are away from their moms in a way that they haven't been before, I think that was such a good part of the story. I'm gonna put it in Spit It. I really enjoyed reading that. So, like, I think there's a difference about like, oh, I really enjoy this book so much because it means so much to me, and really just enjoying reading it. That's a book that I really enjoyed reading it. So I would recommend it to anyone who wants to enjoy a book also. Boys I Know. This I recommend to any Asian American girls, especially any Asian American girls who live in predominantly white areas or neighborhoods. My takeaway is that decisions are super duper complicated, and poor 18-year-olds who have to make so many decisions. It's too complicated, and like we should like try to take care of our 18-year-olds a little bit more instead of like, telling them what to do and like giving them advice. Like, it's already hard enough. So like I just feel so bad. And my artist takeaway is writing a coming of age will be as healing to me as it is to my readers. This book, I don't consider it a romance. I consider it a coming of age, even though there is some romance in it. And I think that's really important. First word of it was great. It hooked me because the cover art was good, but I was kind of like, oh, am I going to like this? And then the first word of the book, I was like, okay, I'm going to love this. I'm going to put this in Spit. All right, CQ. This is the last nonfiction of the year. A Journey Through American Loneliness, which explains exactly. It's a historical book. It's also a little bit of memoir. I recommend it to any lonely people or anyone who's ever been lonely. My takeaway is this is historical and timely because it came out in 2021, even though it was mostly written before the pandemic. How lucky. And also that loneliness is always something that's interesting to ponder. As an artist, I took away nonfiction graphic books because it's not really a novel if it's nonfiction, and so I think I need to think of another word or figure out what the other word for that is. And I think I do want to make it, or at least I want to encourage them to be made or like have a hand in making them, because I feel like I have people in my life that would be very good at writing non-fiction graphic books. So I'm going to put this in Lick It. Anne of Greenville. This was a lovely, fun read. Anyone who has eccentric kids, my takeaway is that kids should be kids, and that there is enough for them to deal with as it is. My takeaway from a lot of these books, and a lot of books that I like to read, and a lot of books that I like to write, is that kids have it so hard. Artist takeaway is that indulgence in describing creativity and color and like everything about that is so pleasant to read. I like reading it, so I can have a little bit more fun in indulging myself and like writing about the very specific colors if my character chooses to think about those very specific colors or very specific design elements. And I liked reading it in this book, so I would like to read it in other ones. I'm going to put it in Spit. Then the last book I read of the year was Better Than the Movies. I would recommend this to rom-com lovers. That's movie rom-coms or book rom-coms, and people in need of another take on grief. I considered this a page turner. I was like so annoyed at so much of what was happening in the book, but I read this so fast. My takeaway is that annoying tropes might be excusable if the B story is good enough. Like this one, it dealt with grief. The rom-commy-ness of it was fun and silly. You got beaten over the head with it, but the actual story about it is a story about grief and how one deals with that. And I just thought it was so good. That part of the book. My art takeaway is I can reference both music and movies and I'll be okay. I have, like I've kind of noted a couple of times in this video already, is that I have the desire to reference songs and reference albums and reference movies even at sometimes, and I feel like a little weird when I write about it, but I have no qualms about reading about it. So I just have to like write it, and if that helps me to write, then I'm going to write it, and it might even end up in my book, and that's okay. So that's what I took away from this. I didn't think I was going to like necessarily need to read her other books, but I'm totally on board and I'm going to read her other books. So this one is pretty high too. I'm going to put it in Lick It. So those are all the books that I read in 2024. What did you think of my list? Is there anything that you recommend that I read based on my rankings of these books? Leave it in the comments below. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. Thank you so much for watching this video. I will see you next time. Bye!